Hey guys, it's Nik the Booksmith. Welcome back, welcome back. I hope this weekend treated you well. But it is Monday, so let's get back to business, as it were. I've got my cup of tea that I just brewed and some dried mangoes, which I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little addicted. Just a little addicted. Because they kind of taste like gummy bears, but healthier. At least that's what I'm telling myself. And my tea, it's just herbal tea. I forget which one. It's one of the zingers, I think. Anyway, today's story is a missing person story from the 1980s. So while I'm talking about this missing person story, I will show you what I'll be working on. Do you remember when I made the eco printed papers? What was it? Probably been 2 months ago now. It's been a minute, and I told you I was going to do something with them. I was not lying. I did something with them. I made this little, like, folio. It's nothing special. It's kind of cute. I stamped botanicals onto the spine. I didn't put a date or anything. I was thinking about it since this is, you know, the year 1921. 1921. Wow. I am behind, aren't I? 2021. I could put the date on here to commemorate this year's foliage. But anyway, I wanted to show you the cover. So the cover is just a little wraparound cover with this elastic band to tie it shut. And the fabric is actually some fabric that I eco-dyed when I was doing the papers. I was thinking about doing some eco-dyed fabric as well. And so while I had the mess and everything out, I did just that. So let me show you what I came up with. As you can see, this part was cut out for this book, but I think it came out pretty, move that for now, came out pretty well. These were Virginia creeper vines with leaves on them. So that's what I made the cover out of. And this piece of fabric was the piece of fabric that sandwiched the leaves with this fabric. So this fabric, then leaves, then this fabric, and it kind of, then you roll it up and it sandwiches it all together. It's a more muted print because it's the opposite of what was on the other one. But it almost looks like a watercolor piece of artwork that somebody watercolored, doesn't it? It still has definite shapes of the leaves and even some of the stems going through. It reminds me of a scarf, I think, like what you would, the type of pattern you'd see on a real lightweight chiffon or silk scarf. Anyway, I thought that was pretty. And then the other one that I did was this one. It's a little darker. And of course it is fern fronds. Fern fronds. The definition in some of these was pretty good. This was a Boston fern I had on my back patio. And you know how Boston ferns are when you buy them at the beginning of the summer and fall comes and the weather starts to cool down and they die and you forget about, anyway, because you don't have room in the house. But after I had taken some fronds off to do this and it turned out so well, I was like, oh. So the Boston fern is inside. We don't really have room for it, but it's inside because I want to be able to harvest fronds off of it, which sounds awful. Like I'm keeping it alive to harvest off of it. A body snatcher. And then this is the piece of fabric that sandwiched, you know, the other side of the leaves. And again, it's very, very pale, but turned out cool too. I wasn't expecting it to turn out cool. But here it is, pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to be working on the pages in this book while I talk about this case. I made a little catch folio, little keeper on the inside. Very loosely, casually, informally bound the pages by sewing them in. And then I added the scientific names for the species, if I could remember, you know, what they were. And then back here, this fabric that I ended up, well, I'm going to end up covering it up because in the back I'm probably going to do something. But anyway, this fabric, it kind of looks like, it's kind of marbly kind of looking. Anyway, I will show you guys how to do that in another video. Anyway, I will shut up and talk about this case. This case is from 1981. Our protagonist is Thelma Pauline Melton, and she preferred the name Polly. She wasn't all that enthused with Thelma, I guess. Everybody called her Polly. At the time of her disappearance, she was 58 years old. Her husband is named Bob, and he is 20 years her senior, so he's 78. I'm getting out some things I need. I'm going to do some metal leaf. Anyway, so even though Polly and Bob live in Jacksonville, Florida, every summer they and a group of friends meet at the Deep Creek Campground outside of Bryson City, North Carolina, and they stay there for a few months at that campground. They have an Airstream trailer. They love to go and stay at this campground, and they've been doing this for like 20 years. So, you know, they really like it. The group that they go with is a very tight-knit group, and if anybody wants to join the group, everybody else in the group has to agree. So it's not like anybody can just say, hey, I'll go camping with you and go camping. No, that's not how it works. And I might work on this book too. This is just a little book that I also made. But if this needs drying time, I might work on this little guy too, just FYI, if you see him show up. So anyway, the summer of 1981 rolls around and Bob and Polly head off to Bryson City, North Carolina. And the Deep Creek Campground is at the base of the Smoky Mountains, which they just love it there. Bob, his health is not that great and he can't go on hikes and stuff like that. His health won't allow him to do that. He stays at the trailer when Polly takes hikes with her friends, and she does that all the time. She likes to go on a daily basis if the weather is nice. And Polly's health isn't that great either. She suffers from high blood pressure and she has strange bouts of nausea that will overcome her. Not a lot is said about what these maladies are, but she's medicated for them. And because of these medications, she doesn't drive. Bob does all the driving. She kind of helps him get around. So it's a great partnership. They kind of need each other, right? So before dinner, Polly and a couple of her friends decide that they're going to go for a little hike, a little walk, because it's a beautiful day. And so the three of them head out for the Deep Creek Trail. And this is one of Polly's favorites. It's an easy trail. It's rated easy. She and her friends have been going on this trail for years and years. They love it. Her friends' names are Red and Trula. They have been camping with Polly for quite some time. And they go off on this hike and they are chatting and laughing. And sometimes Polly is lagging behind. I don't know if she's tired or if she's just looking at nature and, you know, lollygagging. I think we've all been there. But getting toward the end of the trail, Polly picks up her pace and gets ahead of her friends. And they were joking about it as she rounded this bend just out of their sight. When they caught up to the bend and got around it, they didn't see Polly and they were like, wow, she is just booking. They were impressed that she could outpace them. They were like, go Polly. So when they reached the campground again, they headed over to Polly and Bob's Airstream to, give her some kudos for her 110% effort. But she's not at the trailer with Bob. She's not there. So they're like, well, did she, go to the facilities? Or no, I haven't seen her since you guys took off for the hike. That was a little concerning. So they start asking around. I mean, at first, and nobody's panicking, but at first they're just asking it around, and Bob and Red and Trula and some other friends in the campground were just asking around, and they went back to the trail and talked to some other hikers that were walking that trail to see if they had seen Polly or heard anything, and they would listen for if anybody was yelling for help or, stuff like that. But nobody had seen Polly or heard Polly or seen anything that would relate to Polly and where she could be. So after 2 hours of not being able to locate Polly, they let the park ranger know that they can't find her. The park ranger immediately closes the trail to the public and calls the police. The police show up pretty quickly, and because it's already late in the afternoon, it's actually by this time it's 6:30 or so, and they get on it. They get a formal search party formed, and they go off and they search for Polly. They even end up bringing in search dogs, and over 150 people end up on this search. Of course, it goes into, the next day and everything. And the search dogs would hit on a fallen tree that had her scent on it, but there really wasn't anything other than that. That was the only evidence that they could find that Polly was out there in the woods. And they just kind of brush it off because it's like, well, she probably stopped here and rested for a second, or, sat on the log for a second or something. There weren't any other clues than just her scent was there. 4 days later, which is October 2nd now, there is still no sign of Polly, no more clues as to her whereabouts, and sadly, they end the search. They open the trail back up, and I guess you're on your own, Bob. Bob was devastated, just absolutely devastated. There was one report that said that he was so distraught when they couldn't find her that evening that he had to be taken to the hospital because it was affecting him that much. That is the last time anyone has ever seen or heard from Thelma Pauline Melton. So let's talk about some details about her life that might give us some clues as to what happened to her in the Deep Creek campground on that September afternoon in 1981. And then I will give my thoughts about the theories that what other people are thinking. So she, like I said before, was not in the greatest of health. She was a smoker and she suffered from high blood pressure, and she had those bouts of nausea, like I said. It's not like she's jogging down the trail. She's medicated for these serious conditions, and it does affect her daily life. People would say that she was a private person, a very private person, but I think anybody could probably say that about a lot of people. That's not really out of the ordinary. Every year when they went to the campground and camped for a few months, she would volunteer at the Presbyterian food pantry, and they would serve meals to the elderly. And she enjoyed doing that and had been doing that for like the past 4 years. Some of the odd things that happened the day before she went missing, she went and volunteered for like an hour at the food pantry, and you would write down on this note if you would be working the next day. And she always worked on Fridays. That was one of her days that she always worked, but she had noted on this record that she wouldn't be there the next day, but didn't really say why. I mean, it's a little out of character, but it's not shady or anything. Her supervisor there at the food pantry had said that she had never, ever before used the phone there. But on that day before she went missing, she used the phone several times. She didn't say who she was calling. They were not able to trace the calls, And so they have no idea what that was all about. And of course, tracing phone calls in 1981, before the advent of digital, was labor intensive to say the least. It was nuts. So if she was making phone calls or trying to make phone calls, but nobody picked up, would it be even more difficult to trace if there was no call that was completed, like there was no connection? I don't know. I'm not a telephone technical operator person that would know that. Maybe somebody out there would know that. Her minister would say that she alluded that she had had an affair with another man and was feeling very guilty about it. He also said she was coming out of a depression because her mother had passed away a few years earlier, like in 78. And it really devastated Polly when her mama died. She was distraught for a long time. And I mean, that, again, very normal. But he said that she had seemed like she was doing much better. It is important to note that no one else in her life had heard or got clues of another man or having an affair that she, was alluding to. And nothing could ever be found out about it. Like there was no information beyond just what the minister had said. And then one of the other details that came up later was that about 6 months after her disappearance, the next spring, somebody cashed a check that had been issued to a Pauline Melton. That happened in Birmingham, Alabama, which is where Polly was from, at least for a while. I don't know if she was born there, but she had family in the area. All right, now I have to let this stuff dry for a little bit. You can't use it right away. It's gotta get tacky. Okay, theories and my thoughts. So let's tackle them. What about her strange, numerous phone calls from the food pantry the day before? I don't know. Let me interject a personal thought here. How many typical, ordinary actions do we carry out every day that mean absolutely nothing nefarious whatsoever? But if we were to mysteriously disappear, could somebody look back at those activities and start to question what we were doing or what we were meaning to do, our intentions? Let me give you a personal example that can and does happen to me on the daily. Let's say I was going to go outside to work on a project, and so I was heading out to the backyard to go to the shed, get my tools, all that kind of stuff, right? And I get to the shed, and when I get there, I remember that I left my pencil on the kitchen table. So turn around, I head back to the kitchen table, I grab my pencil, and I go back outside toward the shed. But when I reach the shed, I notice my safety glasses aren't sitting there where I left them. Where'd my safety glasses go? So I turn around and head back to the house to get my safety glasses. Halfway back to the house, I realize that my safety glasses are on my head. Because of course they are. So at this point, I silently curse myself, turn around and walk back to the shed, where I realize I forgot yet something else. Somebody watching, especially without context, would immediately think that is one batty broad, and they'd be right. But, come on, who hasn't done something exactly like that, right? We've all been there. We've all done that kind of stuff. So my point is that run-of-the-mill, mundane actions can look suspicious without a point of reference. So without any means to trace those calls, I'm going to chalk them up to maybe Polly was trying to call the pharmacy to have a prescription refilled while she's in town, but they were really busy and couldn't pick up. And so that's why she kept calling, because she was hoping to get somebody at the pharmacy and get her prescription or Bob's prescription refilled while she was in town before she went back to the campground. So because there's really nothing more on that, you can't prove that that was something that would be noteworthy as far as I'm concerned. So, 2. The minister reporting that she was feeling guilty to a relationship that he thought she was alluding to. Nobody else could corroborate what the minister said. And the fact that she didn't say anything outright, he just felt that's what she was talking about, doesn't hold a whole lot of credence for me. Her friends didn't see any signs of her being unhappy in her marriage. And beyond the minister's conjecture, there was no evidence to back up that theory. It's going to be a no for me. She and Bob had only been married 6 years. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't have a bad marriage in 6 years or be unhappy in 6 years, but it just doesn't seem as likely. What about kidnapping? Maybe somebody snatched her, or maybe she ran away. Neither of these fly with me either. No one on the trail heard any kind of scuffle or distress call. She wasn't that far ahead on the trail, and Polly was a tall woman, like almost 6 feet. So it would have taken some effort to be snatched up without somebody noticing. As for running away, she couldn't drive. She didn't have a driver's license and she wasn't allowed to drive. And Bob had the truck and the trailer back at the campground. Somebody would have needed to pick her up. And there were no reports of anybody in the campground seeing any new or strange vehicles that day. Also, she didn't have any of her possessions with her, important items like she didn't have her purse, no money, no medication, nothing. It was all found back where she left it at the trailer. Now, what about that check that was cashed 6 months later that was issued to a Pauline Melton in Birmingham? One report said that the check was from the bank for interest paid on a CD, which for those of you out there that don't know what a CD is, it's when you have some extra funds in your account, so you lend that to the bank and they can use those funds for a certain period of time, but they pay you interest for using that money. Even though this little factoid threw some people for a loop, the cashier could not recall who it was that cashed the check. There wasn't a video or anything like that. In 1982. So, I mean, there was video around at the time, but I mean, not everybody had video. Nothing happened with that. However, my conclusion on the check could be summed up, I think, in 2 scenarios. Either one, a family member who received the check by mistake decided to endorse it and cash it since Polly was missing and they couldn't find her. Or 2, remember, this check was from a bank, not from some rando. So if Polly had a CD invested with a bank, would they be writing her a check for the interest that they owe her and issue it to her with her middle name as her first name? And I don't know about you, but banks are pretty picky about how they issue checks, especially if it's an investment kind of a situation. They're not going to go, hey, John, I know your nickname is Skippy, so we're just going to issue this $5,000 check to Skippy. No, they don't do that. Banks don't have much of a sense of humor when it comes to that. So I'm going to doubt it. If the check was from an individual, then that could be different, because let's say, like me, for example, I don't get checks very often, but let's just say this for example, just for devil's advocate here. At my bank, they know that if it's going to be from a person, that if somebody writes a check to Nik the Booksmith, that's still me, or Nick, just Nick, or my given name, Nicole. So it's known that I have other names that I'm called, but as far as official from the bank, it's my given name and no other. So I'm going to doubt it. I don't think that flies. I think it was probably some other Pauline Melton. It wasn't Thelma Pauline Melton. What about suicide? She was depressed over her mother's death, like devastatingly so. Could she have, taken some pills or something? And again, I mean, I guess, but wouldn't they have found a body? It's not like you can run ahead of somebody on a trail and jump into the woods, overdose on some medication, and then just not be found. That doesn't fly with me either. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think so. So those are the different theories involved with with Polly Melton, and what do I think happened to Polly? Well, I have a definite opinion about what happened to Polly, and you may or may not agree with my conclusion on the matter, but that is your prerogative. So my theory is they were on the trail and they were, walking along, and one of two things. Either one of her bouts of nausea hit her, or maybe she was having other kinds of stomach problems, or maybe she had to pee like really, really bad. And you guys know that you can only like hold off for so long, right? You just gotta go. And sometimes you think you can hold it, and then all of a sudden you're like, nope, I'm gonna do this now. So she starts walking faster than her friends because she wants to get off the trail to pee. Or, like I said, maybe her stomach was upset and she thought, I'm gonna throw up. I'm just gonna get ahead, gonna just throw up off the trail and just do that before they get here, something to that effect. And she steps off the trail, and anybody that lives in the East, especially the Southeast, knows that there are cave formations and other voids underneath the top crust of the ground. So there are sinkholes and you name it all over the place. Like, nature is not kidding around. And I'm sure that you guys have seen pictures of even like entire houses that have been swallowed up by a sinkhole. Just all of a sudden, guess what? Gone. There was it in Kentucky or was it Tennessee? Been like 2012 or something, where that car dealership full of, those really expensive like Corvettes and stuff got sucked down into this deep sinkhole. So do I think this massive sinkhole opened up underneath Polly? No, not necessarily. I think that would have been obvious and they would have found evidence of that. However, I think she could have stepped on an area that was like a very, very thin, loose section where it was just barely covering the ground. Maybe she stepped over a log to get just out of sight of the trail, and she stepped into this part where it was real unstable and she fell. You can fall far, like really far. Just Google sinkholes and you can join my phobia club on sinkholes, because they freak me the heck out because they just, you're just gone. But you can fall literally hundreds of feet, and that's a little more rare. But very, very commonly can you fall 8, 10, 12, 20 feet. And someone that was unstable on their feet to begin with and wasn't in the best of health to begin with, a fall like that could render them either unconscious or unable to call out. In some of these cases, even if you could call out, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter because debris can fall down over you and cover up the opening of the hole, because tree branches and stuff can fall in after you. Once you hit the bottom, you might not even ever know anything again. I mean, that's how dangerous they could be. And I'm sorry for freaking you guys. If you guys don't know about sinkholes, now you know, and now you can be freaked out just like I am. Those of you that know about them can probably attest, and maybe you even have experiences yourself about something like that. But I think she fell into a depression in the ground, either a sinkhole or something like that, a void at the base of a tree, because you all know that sometimes at the base of the tree there can be like a hollow and water can erode big areas. And yeah, I think she fell. I think either debris fell in over the top of her, either she couldn't call out, or, she could have broken her neck. It could be any number of things that could have happened, and she couldn't get out. And because debris fell on top of her, it can kind of close back in on itself. Even though the depression, parts of it can still be in there, it still kind of can close back up a little bit. And those of you that live in North Carolina and Tennessee and all that area down in there, please tell me, isn't quicksand even, like, it's not like super common, but doesn't that happen too, especially if there's been a lot of rain in certain areas? And let me clue those of you in who've never been to North Carolina, they get a little bit of rain. Maybe that had something to do with it. She got stuck in mire or muck or mud and just got sucked in, and it closed all over the top, and guess what? No more Polly. None of the reports that I read mentioned this. This is just my personal conclusion on the matter. It was something that immediately came to my mind, probably because it is a phobia of mine. It's something that is on my mind. And it's something that I personally would be aware of if I was walking in the woods of North Carolina and stepping over logs. And because see, I'm from Indiana and we got our sinkholes too. You know, similar kind of a situation. So I don't know, maybe not as bad. You guys tell me that live in the areas. Let me know what you think. So yeah, that's what I think happened to Polly Melton. I don't think she could ever be found. I mean, it'd be a miracle if anybody could ever find somebody else after something like that, especially after this amount of time. I don't think she'll ever be found. But I think that kind of stuff might happen to people more often than not. And sometimes it's disappearances and stuff like that, or like, oh, it's just so spooky because like people could see them and then all of a sudden they turned around and they were gone. If you were in the woods, there's all kinds of things that you can get lost in. It's just, I don't think it was aliens or Yetis or anything like that. I think it was a sinkhole. So tell me what you think. What do you guys think about that? Do you think it was something natural like that could explain it? And of course, I have no proof either. So if this is just my conjecture, but I think there is a pretty good chance that I am not wrong. Maybe some of you that live in the Smoky Mountain area, maybe you guys have heard of this before. Did they ever come up with anything? Did they ever do any ground penetrating radar in the area where she was last seen to see if there was something to be found underneath the surface of the ground? I couldn't find anything. That is sad for Polly and her family. Her husband, Bob, has, of course, since passed away. But it's still very sad that they had to live out the remainder of their lives without knowing what happened to their Polly. It just kind of breaks your heart. And I know it happens to people all the time because people go missing all the time. Let me give this a little bit of a sanding just because it's a little bright. So let me know in the comments down below what you think. After hearing all the details that are available, do you think that she ran away? Do you think that she got kidnapped? Do you think maybe she took her life because she was so depressed and they just never found her? Or can you get on board with my theory about the sinkhole? Because that's what I think it is. Not kidding around. That's what I think it is. So let me know. I would be really, really interested to know what you think about that, because of course you're going to have a different perspective and you're going to have a different take on it. So you're going to think of things that I don't think about. And that's what's so great about having a community like this, is because it's good to get everybody's input, because just looking at something from your perspective all the time, it's like looking down a tunnel when there's a whole world out there, but you're just looking down a tunnel. And I'll talk about that in another video, because that's a long one. That's a 2 cup of tea video. All right, guys, thank you for joining me today and watching me make a mess. I don't know, it turned out kind of cool though, right? I am getting things ready for the end of the year sale. that will be happening over the second weekend in December for Teachable and Etsy. I will have the Matchbox book kits ready then, along with some other things that I'm trying to get finished. I want to get all that done and get that uploaded for the sale prices. But I will update you on that later. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed our little story and maybe it got your brain working about what you think about the situation. And I will see you all really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.